Military service hides civilian realities from you. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, wrote a book called Why A Students Work for C Students and Why B Students Work for the Government. And this is one of those situations where I agree with someone's conclusion, but I don't necessarily agree with all the steps in their logic. But that's okay. It's a natural dynamic between operators and analysts, and you see it all the time. So I'm just going to hit the key points of his book and then move on to how I interpret his conclusion and, more importantly, what that means for your military transition. Basically, Kiyosaki points out that formal education, whether it's high school or college or grad school, it tends to focus on specialized education and not include any financial literacy training. From his point of view, you have to get away from an academic environment in order to learn good financial lessons. Since A students never leave the academic environment, they never get to a place where they learn those financial lessons. And since C students get away from school as fast as they can, they're much more likely to get financial literacy training, even if it's just through the school of hard knocks. Now, I don't disagree with that part, but what Kiyosaki tends to suggest is that if you gain financial literacy, you will start a traditional business. And that's where I part ways with him, because I don't think he really understands what's happening with A students. So as you transition out of the military, I think it's important that you develop some financial literacy and that you understand why A students work for C students. See, A students who learn specialized skills like engineering or medicine or finance, they get employed by large corporations that pay them a decent salary. They don't really have to worry about what the company is. A statistician can work for an oil company or a dog food company, and if the company fails, that A student can move on to just another company. Meanwhile, the C students are not necessarily getting good jobs. They get hired by the same companies to fill rank and file positions. Those positions tend to be low paid and interchangeable, and the C students have decent mobility as long as the total number of jobs in the labor market stays about the same. But if a C student wants to get rich, they pretty much have to start a company. That means they're going to have to take risk. They got to identify some niche where they can gain a competitive advantage. They're going to focus on a simple, narrow business. Take out some loans, hire some people, negotiate a couple contracts. And then, if they're able to carve out an operating profit, they'll hire some of those A students to expand their profits further. Now, I'm not done, but here's how this applies to your military transition. While you're in the military, these differences in opportunity and courses of action, they tend to get muted. 5 new staff sergeants show up, and the sergeant major isn't really concerned about their academic potential. He's got vacancies, and he's going to fill them. Plus, any mistakes the sergeant major makes in assigning these staff sergeants, well, it all gets smoothed out by the same kind of mistakes that are being made in assigning specialists and assigning the lieutenants. In the end, it all averages out. And this matters for your military transition because so many service members have never really done the self-assessment to understand how they fit into that paradigm of why A students work for C students. So now, why is it that B students work for the government? Okay, one of the important things to notice about A students is that those highly specialized skills that they develop are most useful when they're applied against clear problems. You've probably seen A students who quickly get frustrated when they're presented with fuzzy problems and data that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's part of the reason that A students work for C students. The C students build their businesses around clearly defined niches, and that means that they have clear, straightforward problems they need solved. Meanwhile, the B students, they kind of been muddling their way through school. No offense, but they understand just enough to get by. But that's the thing, they do get by. And through that process, they learn to tolerate a pretty high degree of ambiguity. So while A students start getting queasy when the questions are vague, B students are unfazed. In fact, they hardly notice how unsolvable government problems are. And hey, the pay is pretty good. I mean, it's not the stratospheric opportunities of business ownership or some highly skilled fields, but it's pretty good. Now, let's go back to how this fits into your military transition. As you go through the Transition Assistance Program, they're going to want to slot you in one of three tracks: education, employment, or entrepreneurship. Notice the pattern? But they're not really going to make much of an effort to help you understand which of these three approaches is best for you. To know what's best for you, you're going to need to get some of that financial literacy that Robert Kiyosaki advocates for. And just to be fair to the education system, I don't think that financial literacy can be force-fed to high school students between trigonometry and Lord of the Flies. Financial literacy is learned best when it's pursued by a student who actually is motivated to learn. So if you're starting to think about your military transition, now is a great time to figure out how your natural qualities can be leveraged to their greatest advantage by getting some financial literacy. And if you're close to your transition, remember, it is never too late. Now, if you want a real-world question that you're going to have to wrestle with as you go through your military transition, watch this video on VGLI.